All right, so many thanks to Professor Khanna and Professor Prakash for framing our conversation to follow. We appreciated your placing before us your thoughts about human agency in planetary frame, colonial categories, data as method, the global and the role of the humanities in the future of India as well as global India. So we will jump right into this panel that we have before you here today, which is focused on the arts within this larger frame of the humanities. So we will go in the order that you see on the program, and I will introduce each speaker as they come, and then in the end we'll hopefully have about 15-ish, maybe more minutes for Q&A, in which you can also ask questions to Professor Khanna and Professor Prakash. So to begin with, we have here Professor Sonal Khullar, who is the W. Norman Brown Associate Professor of South Asian Studies in the Department of the History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania. She's the author of Worldly Affiliations, Artistic Practice, National Identity and Modernism in India, 1930 to 1990, which came out in 2015 and received the Bernard S. Cohn Book Prize from the Association of Asian Studies. She's currently completing a book manuscript entitled The Art of Dislocation, Conflict and Collaboration in Contemporary Art from South Asia. In her own words, as on her website, she draws on scholarship in anthropology, feminist theory, and post-colonial studies, and her research and teaching interrogate the global turn in art history rather than taking its significance and implications for granted. So I think given our focus here on the global, we look forward to Professor Khullar's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya, for that very kind introduction, and thanks to Gyan and Ranji for those opening remarks. That was sobering and inspiring. Thank you also to the organizers for inviting me to share my work with all of you. In the interest of a healthy conversation afterward, I'm just going to jump right in. At the 15th Sharjah Biennial, a major exhibition of global modern and contemporary art, Emirati artist Asma Belhamar's Monuments of Al-Frij remembered South Asian migrant workers who built roads, railings, walls, homes, and offices across the Gulf in the mid to late 20th century. In her book, Impossible Citizens, Dubai's Indian Diaspora, anthropologist Neha Vora has termed these workers, without legal membership to the state, its quintessential citizens. They are a significant, if understudied, diasporic population, though several projects in the contemporary art world have turned our attention to them. Since Al-Frij means the neighborhood in Emirati Arabic, and you see the title here, Belhamar's title might be understood as local monuments, or monuments to the locality. Installed at the Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed Palace and Farm in the oasis town of Al-Daid, Belhamar's sculptural forms mirrored the balustrades of a recently restored building, once a weekend retreat for the ruling family of Sharjah, and now a venue for contemporary art. Visitors to the exhibition encountered Kurdish artist Rushdie Anwar's sculpture of a headless rider and horse in a stark landscape where a dust storm enlivened Iraqi Jewish artist Michael Rakowitz's conceptual work linking Al-Daid to Al-Siba in Basra Governorate of Iraq, places of conflict and ecological catastrophe and neglect, to use the artist's words. Sited across from a defunct malaria clinic managed by the UAE Ministry of Health and Prevention and used as a venue for the biennial, Belhamar's, Anwar's, and Rakowitz's monuments and anti-monuments suggested social and cultural movements across the global South. Bearing traces of diasporas, their art might be described as evacuee properties, to use a term derived from the history of partition of British India. That term appears in laws, policies, and systems in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan to manage properties and persons affected by partition. For example, the Administration of Evacuee Property Act of 1950, the Displaced Persons Compensation and Rehabilitation Act of 1954, and the Evacuation Interest Separation Act of 1951, all implemented today by the Ministry of Home Affairs of the Government of India. In her book, Evacuee Cinema, Bombay and Lahore in Partition Transit, published in 2022, Salma Siddique repurposes that vocabulary of the state to consider cinematic traffic across the borders of India and Pakistan before and after 1947. In my book, manuscript, The Art of Dislocation, I use the term evacuee properties not to refer to refugee populations or cross-border movements per se, but to evoke a particular quality of contemporary art from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka since the 1990s. A sense of loss, edginess, and haunting, with the past looming over the present, is palpable in contemporary art, such as Indian artist Shilpa Gupta's installation, which you see here, from the Venice Biennale in 2015. And that same sense of loss, edginess, and haunting is visible in evacuee properties, real structures scattered across partition space, such as 11 Temple Road, just off Mall Road in Lahore. Note the elegant balustrades, which functions as an art space, and the headquarters of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy. You can see here in this photograph the board of Dr. Amolak Rak Mehta, whose home this once was. This contemporary art, for example, this work installed at 11 Temple Road, asserts partition as a condition of belonging to South Asia and suggests that diaspora, in its basic sense of dispersal, movement, and migration, is key to understanding the region's histories and futures. Like Hassan's work, which plays on original and copy and absence and presence. I know the lighting isn't great, but these are plaster of Paris rose petals right here. So like Hassan's work, which plays on original and copy and absence and presence, Belhamar's installation recalled imperial tracery created by the British Public Works Department, whose buildings in Asia and Africa echo each other. As we see in British artist Zarina Bhimji's Out of the Blue, Yellow Patch, and Jungbar, films that were shot in Havelis, traditional mansions, colonial offices, and railway stations in Uganda, Kenya, India, and Zanzibar. Bhimji's films move between built and natural environments across continents. Actually, I'm going to move back one just to show you. I hope you're noticing the balustrades here too, right here in this image. So Bhimji's films move between built and natural environments across continents and displace the viewer's notion of place, space, and geography. Like Bhimji, Belhamar conjures diasporic movements across South Asia and West Asia during a period from 1892 to 1971, when the Trucial states from which the UAE emerged were governed by British colonial authorities from Bombay. Contemporary conditions of work and labor struggles at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and Louvre Abu Dhabi, among other institutions in the UAE, are often in the news. Belhamar presents a longer view of labor, migration, and South-South exchange. 88.52% of the population of the UAE is diasporic, of which roughly 60% are from South Asia, and of the Indians, roughly 40%, approximately 1 million people, are from Kerala. That diaspora was visible in shop signs in Sharjah for establishments such as Karachi Darbar, Delhi Nihari, Chittagong Fresh Cool, Asian Empire Restaurant, Baluchistan Electronics, California Travels, Ibn Battuta Drugstore, and Rukn al Diplomacy Tailoring. Yeah, I made a list, there's a much longer list in my notes. Dreams can come true, here on the left. Declared British artist Lubina Hamid's site-specific installation, which took the form of storefront signage that evokes the aspirations of migrants. Iftikhar Dadi and Elizabeth Dadi's Efflorescence, a site-specific installation in an erstwhile vegetable market, presented the national flowers of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and India alongside those of Palestine, Eritrea, and Sudan. Growing brightly in a dark warehouse-like space, these artificial flowers signify dream and death. And here you see the Padma or lotus for India. Nations and diasporas are felt and lived not only at checkpoints and international crossings, but also in everyday tasks and ordinary activities. At this vegetable market, I was reminded of indoor shopping centers, not malls, from New Delhi in the 1980s, specifically grocery runs to Mehta stores in GK1 Market, where we browsed wares under fluorescent lights and drank Campa Cola, not Coca-Cola, in pre-liberalization India, while waiting for goods to be packed. The understanding of India as part of an Indian Ocean world that I observed at the Sharjah Biennial was evident also at the third edition of the Kochi Museurist Biennale, South Asia's largest exhibition of modern and contemporary art, in 2016. At Aspinwall House, one of the exhibition's main venues, sited on Kochi Harbor, Pakistani artist Naiza Khan's The Journey We Never Made included a series of drawings and 8 handmade boats, such as Thao, 400 BCE, and Dusa, 1998, here, modeled on vessels that historically plied the Indian Ocean, with brilliantly colored sails and hulls, patterned surfaces, and occasional illumination, which you see here. These toy-like objects in plexiglass cases resembled Indian counterparts for sale on the beach near the Chinese fishing nets, a tourist attraction in Fort Kochi, a stone's throw away from Aspinwall House. They also reminded me of more elaborate models of the type of boat displayed in my hotel. These boats, real and represented, suggest connections between 2 cities, Kochi and Karachi, on the western rim of the Indian Ocean, and the diasporas created by empires, nations, and partitions. Casting its gaze upon these diasporas, Khan's work in the official exhibition that year resonated with binary states. And you're seeing the signage here. Resonated with binary states, India UAE, a collateral exhibition curated by Umair Butt, Rashid bin Habib, and Ahmed bin Habib for the biennial. Projects by UAE-based artists Amar Al-Attar, Rasha Al-Dawesan, and Vikram Devecha were sited in Greenwich Village, a performing arts center on the same street as Kalvati Juma Masjid, a mosque established in 1384 by Arab merchants, and Farid Aulia Dargah, the tomb of a Sufi saint attached to it, institutions that attest to enduring religious and commercial ties between South Asia and West Asia. In an auditorium that took on the quality of a history museum, viewers encountered a fishing boat from Kerala, akin to the Abra, a traditional wooden boat from the Gulf region. This found object was a reminder of historical and contemporary voyages across the Indian Ocean and the experiences of West Asian and South Asian subjects across the 20th and 21st centuries. In Kuwaiti writer Al-Dawesan's Hoisting Histories, documentary photographs were reproduced on banner-like surfaces and shown with archival film footage and text from oral histories. Al-Dawesan's narratives of poets, doctors, journalists, engineers, and business people generated a complex portrait of work, play, rest, and travel at a time when the Indian rupee was the currency of the Trucial states. On the upper level of the auditorium, Emirati artist Al-Attar's Reverse Moments presented Indian photographer Prem Ratnam's archive, including photographs, camera equipment, and business documents. Originally from Kerala, where he studied physics, Ratnam came to work in his uncle's photography studio in Abu Dhabi in 1971 and eventually opened his own studio in 1982 in partnership with United Color Film, the nation's first printing service. In a theater on the ground floor, Devecha's film, Vidu, House, showed plans for buildings and gardens on the Malabar coast in India, supported by remittances from the Gulf and conveying an aesthetic sensibility that combines a taste for Nalketu, traditional Kerala homes, and Khaliji, Arab, associated with the Gulf, Khaliji furnishings, decorative elements, and other accoutrements that broadcast your newly returned status, as the critic Rahel Aima has put it. Conversations on screen reveal the predicament of many migrant workers and impossible citizens in Bora's terms. When we go back, we don't have a definite plan of what we'll do. With its peculiar mix of isolation and activity, this still encapsulates my idea of evacuee properties, which is to say, an art of loss, edges, traces, and absences. Through his collaboration with two UAE-based clients from Kerala and an architecture and design firm in Thrissur, this Beirut-born, Mumbai-raised, New York-trained, Dubai-based artist offers an image of global India replete with uncertainty and dislocation, of living between places and imagining possible futures. For us, this stage has just started. The construction has still to begin, says one of his collaborators, Invidu, a Malayalam word for home related to the Tamil vitu that connotes a sentient being rather than an inert object. Anticipating that construction, the construction which has still to begin, Devecha's film shows how making art and making home can be critical gestures and diasporic prerogatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kuller. So the next speaker is Professor Jina Kim, who's the George P. Bickford Professor of Indian and South Asian Art and Professor of South Asian Studies at Harvard. She's the author of Receptacle of the Sacred, Illustrated Manuscripts and the Buddhist Book Cult in South Asia, 2013, which earned an honorable mention from the Association for Asian Studies' Bernard S. Cohn Prize Committee. She's also the author of Garland of Visions, Color, Tantra, and a Material History of Indian Painting, which came out in 2021. She's working on two different book manuscripts, one on goddess manuscripts and gender in the book Arts, and the other on representations of women in pre-modern South Asian art. She's also leading public-facing digital humanities projects on the history of color in art. So with that, I think we can dive in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Divya, and thank you, the organizers, and thank the keynote speakers for the framing remarks. And I realized I could have talked about many other things, including climate crisis work that I do with curating an exhibition on climate crisis with India as a center, but I decided to share this particular work that's more public facing with this group. So Mapping Color in History is a digital humanities project that I started to document the published and ongoing pigment research in museological institutions to create a searchable database. And now we hope to transform it into a publicly available interdisciplinary research platform. So I'm not going to read off the whole thing, but it really is trying to bring together the scientific data drawn from existing and ongoing material analysis of pigments in Asian painting, actually starting with South Asia. And I'm hoping with this work that we're going to be able to not only document pigments and their material properties, but also enable an in-depth historical analysis of pigment data through a search tool that identifies specific examples and their locations in both time and space. And one example that I'll show you, if it works, is if you search for orpiment, and the site website is mappingcolor.fas.harvard.edu, anyone can go play with it. And the data looks something like this. And I'll come back to how we come about doing this, but I just would already point out the fact that this is very specific thing that's tied to an object, and also we do talk about certainty level of these identifications, so it's not just a black box that gives you an answer. I thought it would be helpful to, and this is my pitch points for kind of getting funding for this project, and one of which is actually by beginning with a focus on South Asia and the Himalayas, it will also advance our general understanding of the history of pigments, since existing studies rely heavily on the data drawn from Western art, and I'll explain what I mean by this. So I really started working on this, partly working on this Garland of Visions book. It has a long subtitle, Color, Tantra, and a Material History of Indian Painting. And the material history here is really thinking about the materials that make color. And color is such a murky tool to use, an analytical tool, because color perception is so subjective, and how do you actually describe a color is also very subjective. And what you're seeing on that screen is different from what I see on this screen, and that variation is so much. But I decided to take a color realist position, and I was really particularly interested in understanding period-specific artisanal knowledge about painting materials and painterly practices. And to do that, I also was, of course, looking at languages and textual sources of referring to color. And for instance, here, that bits of red pigment from this is text from Nagananda Banking Harsha. This is a 7th century text. And of course, the translator, James Mellison, actually kind of footnotes it, red arsenic or rare agar. And when I saw that, well, actually, you can't really say that's red arsenic or rare agar, because we don't know what that actually term meant. And if you look for something like sindur in Sanskrit dictionary, it will give you all sorts of, as we heard earlier, Sanskrit has such semantic range. And of course, if you look at this definition, red, lead, minium, vermilion, it's all same thing. They're not the same thing chemically. Like vermilion is mercury based, whereas red lead is lead based. So it's a completely different pigment, and we're given these different definitions, and I really wanted to understand what's historically specific understanding of these terms. So this crowd, I don't think I need to explain who the Krishna is, and you all know what Krishna's color is, right? Right? What color is Krishna? Blue. So how blue is Krishna? This is sort of culled from different manuscripts and paintings about 1500 to 1900. And see what my point is, that see how I believe it's actually artists and artistic interventions and material availability of certain types of pigments and colorants that shape the way we see each color. So it's period specific, it's culturally specific, the meaning and the significance is very tied to each moment in time and place. And partly I was galvanized to work on this project when I was talking with the scientists about the analytical data on this particular Jain manuscript. Yeah, I'm sure like people in this room is familiar with that particular way of depicting Krishna. So I was talking with the scientists about the analytical data on this particular Jain manuscript folio. This is XRF data, because she said, we had a meeting after, so I asked to analyze manuscript in the MFA Museum of Fine Arts collection that dates pre-1500, because we just don't have a lot of information about pre-1500. And she goes, I'm really concerned because it has cobalt in it. And cobalt blue, as a synthetic pigment, is a man-made pigment with cobalt and aluminum, and is supposed to be lab created in Europe in about 1803, 1804. And another cobalt-containing blue pigment called smalt is also known to have been made and popularized in Europe starting in the 17th century onwards. And this manuscript is dated by Colophon in 1497. So she thought this must be some sort of later adulteration. And I found this quite puzzling because the manuscript otherwise looked like it wasn't really meddled with. It just was kind of consistent with what I had been studying with everything else in the 15th century. So, that's interesting. And I sort of started looking into it. I realized, actually, we don't know what was available in India. Like, because all the knowledge about pigments and history of pigments are based on European canon, like Western art canon. So what if there were things that they were using something locally available? Another good example of this is zinc white, zinc oxide, which is also believed to have not been used as pigment until the 18th century when Europeans started to use it as pigment. But zinc is also found in smelting grounds in Rajasthan from the beginning of the Common Era, if not before, and used in Ayurveda and cosmetics. So you could imagine this actually could have been used, but we don't have that baseline understanding. So that's how I actually started. And so that's another type of smelt, the potassium glass colored with cobalt. And this particular painting actually does have cobalt-based blue or smelt in it. And if the scientist actually tells me the comparison between this data and we did look at the data together, this data that actually is confirmed smelt, that actually goes with the date of production in Europe that is being kind of already traded into India, which actually will tell us when these things are coming into India, if it's being imported. And it actually is pretty immediate as it's become popular in Europe. You see them appearing in Indian courts. So the database is trying to kind of capture that and give you sort of fundamentally like reference point to think about what is circulating, being traded, and then give you clues about thinking about connectivity beyond what we know just from textual sources. So the MCH, I call it, Mapping Color and History, I call it MCH, is a huge interdisciplinary collaborative project. So this is sort of type of data captured on the MCH database, art historical data, and what seems pretty simple, mapping color in history when you're trying to make it object-based. If you look at like Indian art like work, it's often the case, pre-modern work is going to be like artist unknown, and somewhere in North India, 17th, 18th century. You cannot map that. You just cannot map when something says, it's North India, 17th, 18th century. Just like there's no way mapping this. So this means what looks like a simple data point requires a whole lot of research to narrow things down and actually understand them contextually, historically. And so it might appear as a point on a map and a point in our database, but it actually is very much based on rigorous research. And we're working on actually conveying also the information that the certainty level of our attribution of date and the space, there is certain things are very certain, but certain things are kind of medium level confidence, and certain things are we're really, really guessing here. So we are hoping, because as you saw, the pigment data actually has a certainty level because scientists were insistent that we can't be 100% certain unless we have done the whole gamut of analysis. When I first went to talk to scientists asking, can you just tell me what's on it? Like, they were like, this is all interpretation. Like, it's every single step you need to go through to get to, almost positively that. But I'm thinking like, if you just, you see calcium, like it must be the calcite. No, you can't jump to that conclusion. I get warned and scolded all the time for saying things of that nature. So we decide to keep that confidence level of the data on the database, and then we're working to kind of make the art historical data more nuanced. And we're bringing this art historical and conservation science data together through this digital humanities tool, the database and online research platform, right? And I I describe mapping color and history as sort of a three-legged stool, borrowing this term from our director of the Conservation Center at Harvard, Narayan Kandenkar, who describes their conservation as sort of three-legged stool. So all three legs of data science and digital humanities, conservation science, art history need to kind of work together, and they need to be equally strong for it to function optimally. And this is all brought together through the digital humanities tool. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm lucky that I'm at Harvard with scientists and conservators at Harvard Art Museums and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. They've been so enthusiastic and supportive from the very beginning of the project. And of course, a database is as good as the data within it. And the controlled pigment analysis data is very important. So we have been sort of working with the colleagues in the two museums nearby or on our campus and others. And then And then I started this, this work in India where I wanted to really, so there are things, let's say like 17th century manuscript that was prepared in Gujarat somewhere, let's say, and it throughout 20th century, it got sold off to different collections. So they're heavily dispersed all around the globe. Some remained in India, some like went to different parts of the world. And the climate conditions, how they're preserved, how they're cared for, what does that do to these paintings? And that was my concern, because there are a set of palm leaf manuscript folios that are, some are in India, some are in Bangladesh, some are in different collections in America, and they look different. So that's also one of my motivations to start working in India. So fortunately, we had the support of the Mittal Institute, and I think in the context of this conference, I want to emphasize this international collaboration work that we're doing in India through the Mittal Institute's support. So we established a mobile heritage lab in 2021. And this was part of my goal to advocate for research-based conservation and preservation of cultural heritage in India and South Asia in general. So mobile heritage lab with, so this was established with the Tata Mittal grant, and we do have a core equipment set of equipment we have for on-site and non-invasive analysis, because we're dealing with objects that are pretty fragile and old, and you can't take samples from. So, and we worked with the CSMBS initially, Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya, analyzing over 30 objects in the collection. And what we do is actually the data gets collected locally at the site, and we interpret and record the data. We have scientists on the team who interpret the data. And it's not just the scientists who read the data that is needed. It's a very much collaborative reading together, because scientists will have certain ways of thinking about it as they don't consider the period, or it's just a point of data. And I come in to say, I don't think that's actually possible at this point. Can you read it again? So we're able, anyways, and we do also have data reporting templates for low resource setting. And this is a mobile heritage lab in action. So we were able to pursue a historic collaboration with the Asiatic Society Mumbai, where I had done research on the art of Indian manuscripts in the past. And I've been visiting several times in the past 10 years, asking to see this very particularly important early 16th century manuscript dated 1516 Common Era. And the analysis data, and we were able to collaborate and actually do analysis on this manuscript and document the whole thing. And we do put this analysis data and artistical research into reports that we send back to the institution, along with the thorough condition reports and suggestions for further research and conservation needs. And we currently can't actually do any conservation campaign ourselves, but in this cycle with the Asiatic Society Mumbai, we were able to offer to rehouse all manuscripts that we analyzed for safekeeping. So this was, again, done through the Mittal Institute's support. And another exciting avenue of collaborative research that we have been pursuing is collecting pigment samples from artists currently working in traditional painting methods and donating them to the Harvard Art Museum's Forbes Pigments collection so that they can be analyzed at the Strauss Center. And but this, again, you need not just only data collection and analysis, you need the humanists and art historians to come in to say, yes, it's important to emphasize the ethnographic research and what the artists are reporting as their usage and their names of the pigments, but also you need to actually historicize this knowledge and understand where those names come from, and record that as along with the scientific name that's given through the scientific analysis. So that's what we've been working on, and this is truly a sort of interdisciplinary international collaborative work that we're doing. And I don't think I have time to show you the whole thing. You are going to go look at it. So I will just end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kim. The last speaker on our panel is Professor Iftikhar Dadi, who is John H. Burris Professor at the Department of the History of Art and Visual Studies at Cornell. His publications include Lahore Cinema, which might well be the first scholarly examination of mid-century cinema from Lahore, and Modernism and the Art of Muslim South Asia from 2010, which received the book prize from the American Institute of Pakistan Studies. His work offers a way of writing histories of non-Western modern art by situating modernism as a transnational rather than something located primarily within a national art history. He's also a practicing curator and an artist, as we saw in Professor Kuller's presentation. Take it away, Professor Dadi.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to Ranjana Khanna, Vivek, and Divya, and all the other organizers for inviting me. So, in the interest of time, we all got very short time to present. So, I made a timed PowerPoint. Okay, so this is a PowerPoint that's going to run through, and it will show you lots of images. I won't actually talk about any of the images, but I'll talk about the concept behind this. Okay. And I'm also sorry that the conditions for viewing are not ideal in this room. So I spent some time preparing this PowerPoint, and if I had known, what this room was going to be like, I would have done it differently. So I'm sorry that you will miss out on some of the vibrancy of the images. This is an exhibition that I co-curated with an Indian curator, Rubina Karode, who's the director and chief curator of the Kiran Nadar Museum in Delhi. Okay, and what it is it's called Pop South Asia, and it showed at the Sharjah Art Foundation in 2022 and moved and showed in Delhi at 2023. So the exhibition focuses on a major but largely unexamined engaged development in modern and contemporary art of South Asia. Its engagement with popular culture from the mid-20th century through the present. The rapid development of capitalism, urbanism, media, technology, and mass politics since the late 19th century has engendered multiple resonances in the complex societies of South Asia, providing openings for artists to engage with popular social and cultural developments. Here, pop art, the meaning of pop art here is not confined to what is commonly understood in a Western context as engaging primarily with late capitalist consumer culture and media imagery, although it is certainly that as well. Rather, pop artistic practices unfolded in the context of uneven development, multiple temporalities, layered aesthetic regimes within societies that are in rapid and turbulent transition. Now, in terms of pop art as a concept, really develops, in the Western world first, right? Primarily, actually, in New York, right? But in the last 15, 20 years, there has been, scholarly, studies and efforts and positions taken to think about pop art really as a global kind of phenomena, right? And and I'll just mention a few landmarks on that. There was a book called Pop Art and Vernacular Cultures from 2007 that was edited by Kobina Mercer, an art historian. And in 2015, there were actually two important exhibitions called The World Goes Pop, which was at Tate Modern, and International Pop, also in 2015 and at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. But neither of them actually engaged on South Asia, right? So one of the ways this project tries to do is to actually bring the South Asian story to thinking about pop art as a global phenomena, okay? So contemporaneous with the global efflorescence of pop art, South Asian artists, whether practicing in the region or living in the diaspora, were deeply engaged with questions of the popular. These developments span the modernist era into the present. There have been very few exhibitions and studies of South Asian pop art. One possible exception is the work of Bhupen Khakar, who received a retrospective exhibition at the Tate Modern in 2016, whose work can be considered, or aspects of his work can be considered in terms of being pop, okay? Okay. Now, the scope of the exhibition that me and Rubina co-curated is broader, or we attempted to make it broader, however, seeking to understand not only artistic practices associated with the pop sensibility across different generations, but also the specificity and shared context of their emergence in diverse sites across South Asia and its diaspora. So one of the arguments we make is that pop art's close engagement with facets of popular cultural and social developments encourages precisely such an approach that is cross-generational but also cross-geographic, okay? And which acknowledges the trans-regional flow of popular culture in the form of media images, soundscapes, cinema, and that has continued despite serious impediments to physical movements posed by border regimes in South Asia currently. So pop art in South Asia and its diaspora does not, however, constitute a single movement. So there wasn't any movement which called itself pop art in South Asia, right? But many artists have worked in this modality either as individuals or in conversation with fellow travelers in places such as Baroda in India, Dhaka in Bangladesh, and Karachi in Pakistan over the decades. Many artists have been very familiar with Western developments, having studied, traveled, and lived there, or by exposure to publications and media. Nevertheless, for the majority of the works presented here, references solely to Western pop art don't provide a fully adequate explanatory framework. A great diversity of labor and life practices characterized South Asia in the early modern era. During British colonialism, it led to dramatic changes in the region as new institutions and technologies such as museums, cartography, the census, archaeological and linguistic surveys, as well as new legal frameworks came into place. Art and photography made landscape history, ethnicity, and profession visible in new ways. British colonialism also violently reordered the economic landscape of South Asia from being a large exporter of finished artisanal products to kind of a net importer and afflicted by tremendous poverty by the end of the 19th century. Nevertheless, entrepreneurs and communities were constituting new assemblages of technology, urbanism, and industry and media from really the, constantly, but especially from the late 19th century onwards. Many artists from that time also began to deploy Western academic realism to address mythology, history, and local subjects. Color printing also made the this imagery widely available via the chromolithographic print, in many cases in alliance with branding and publicity for local kind of capitalist ventures. The artist Raja Ravi Verma is an exemplary figure in this regard, not only creating vivid mythological paintings in an academic register, but in his later years also successfully translating these into inexpensive chromolithographic prints that circulate until today and which made available divine images to publics across social hierarchies. In South Asia, much of the activity of the commercial life of bazaars, religious and political groups, small and medium-scale production and service, and informal settlements continues to be organized by various vernacular arrangements. And media in South Asia has been making enormous inroads into popular imagination since the later 19th centuries, and of course continues shows no sign of slowing down now. So the rise of chromolithographic prints, the emergence of cinema during the early 20th century, the cassette revolution of the 1970s, and the VCR soon after, and now the digital media revolution, and the social media revolution unfolding today are significant decentralized and non-state expressive forms that enact new senses of locality and affiliations. So South Asian publics continue to be cross-hatched by conflicting claims of languages, castes, genders, religions, classes, and above all by their varying abilities to achieve recognition and voice. Urban groups have long deployed diverse popular aesthetic, commercial, political modalities to stake claims of participation and representation in an arena that is national in certain facets, such as politics, institutions, and infrastructure. It's also transnational in many respects, which includes migration and media flows, as well as commodity circulation. And it's subnational as well, local networks based on customary or local kind of linkages or economies. The bazaar in South Asia is not simply a realm of commercial exchange, therefore, but the bazaar as a concept as well as a real place, okay? But a site of production as well as circulation and exchange within and across multiple domains. This bazaar matrix is in some distinction to the domain marked by formal citizenship, big capital at the national or transnational levels, and the so-called high art on view at the art gallery and the museum. Nevertheless, the high and popular domains of aesthetics, commerce, ethics are not hermetically sealed or isolated from each other. Rather, there is constant and resonant traffic between them. The popular thus also notates the realm of informal life and the vibrant flourishing of vernacular capitalism and society in the public sphere of urban South Asia. So the exhibition, therefore, consequently develops with reference to all of these multiple histories, right, and lineages. One of the ways we tried to limit the exhibition was to look at the work only of artists who recognize themselves as fine artists or artists, right? So in other words, we did not include objects of, in the popular realm, which is otherwise an infinite kind of realm, right? Okay. So artists' imaginative engagement with traditional and performative modes of devotional craft and folk practices constitutes one approach. Others include addressing large-scale multinational and vernacular bazaar modes of capitalism and interventions into the aesthetic transformations engendered by print culture, cinema, and digital media. Artists also comment on political impasses, partition, migration, displacement, and borders. They conjure utopia and reflect on dystopia, and tackle issues of identity, gender, belonging, and selfhood both at home and in the diaspora. Above all, they deploy play and humor and embrace aesthetic life worlds made by craft, technology, urbanization, commodity circulation, and media flows, or everything that is impure, I would say, okay, in the realm of art. This project, therefore, calls for a more capacious understanding of pop art as a constellation of artistic practices that resonate along multiple lineages, which we argue is a conception that's more adequate to the heterogeneity and diversity of experience in South Asia in the last few decades. One of the ways in which post-colonial societies are always characterized by, including societies in South Asia, are that they're characterized by lack, right? So there's a lack of museums, there's a lack of, like a scientific, analysis of, painting or a fully historical and scientific understanding of materials and so on. But in the popular realm, the problem is precisely the opposite, which is of evanescent excess. So objects and practices of fine arts provide and our argument is that why do we look at through the privileged vantage point of the artist, right, into this realm, right? And our argument is that that objects and practices of fine art arguably provide a privileged and critical view into the wider popular realm. An art exhibition of high objects or high, or fine art, kind of self-declared fine art objects that engages with the popular realm does not require a reproduction of the latter's overflowing surplus in a museum setting. Rather, the curatorial endeavor is to foreground key relays that enable new aesthetic relations of materials and senses and to identify how reflexive art practice can address contemporary quandaries of the self and society. The project begins, so the project basically has works from really the 1960s into the present, but even earlier works, like there is some Ravi Verma works from 1937, which we deploy the term proto-pop, right? So pop art as a global movement or a movement in the Western world really begins to be self-identified in the late 50s onwards. But if you look at, for example, Japan or South Asia, then you can identify lineages that go back even earlier, right? And people call that proto-pop. So we have some proto-pop in this exhibition as well, right? Okay. The artists in this exhibition hail from and work in various locations in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or sustain their practice in the diaspora. The exhibition underscores the strength of their practices, both in formalist terms and their engagement with the complexities of the popular, and affirms the ongoing potential of art to address complex and vexed issues facing the self and society through irony, play, humor, and forms that bring high art mediums in a critical dialogue with popular registers. This is, what we would argue is this is more important than ever at a time when forces of intolerance and exclusion in the region are increasingly appropriating popular mediums and aesthetics, in contrast to the popular realm ever being in danger of being usurped by populist ressentiment and affective injury. High pop art objects and practices can potentially enable critical reflection on the popular that would otherwise be unnoticeably subsumed in a ceaseless ebb and flow of kind of, daily life, okay? So needless to say, this is not intended to be full. Yes, I got it, yeah. This is not intended to be a comprehensive exhibition, okay? And, but rather to suggest kind of like spark ideas and suggest lineages. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dadi. So we have 6 minutes for the Q&A. So maybe we can collect quickly some questions. Oh my gosh, I see many hands. You back there, hello, Anu, and then Hassan, and oh my gosh, so many names. So Hassan, why don't we...
Right, can you hear me? Okay, you didn't miss much. My question really is kind of asking the panelists as a whole to think about the panel in relation to the vision of the conference, which, to quote again, is to bring together multiple themes related to India's future that are often discussed separately in disciplinary silos, and also to stimulate high-impact collaborations on global India. And as a graduate student in the humanities myself, who is often pressed to think about the relevance of their work to, the world, I wonder if the panelists have any suggestions on how the conversations around arts and humanities connect either to the other themes of the conference, whether that's inclusion or economy, or in any ways, perhaps to even go beyond just mere connections and to actually think about collaboration.
Some questions, but I'll go back there because that hand was, here you go.
Thank you. My question is, what is the most important value that a diaspora artist can have, in your opinions?
You, give me a...
I really enjoy the panel, but my interest is in archaeology and museum, and I have a specific question for Professor Kim. Since your interest is in Buddhism, to what extent have funding with regard to the sites Genta and Lara, which contain a great deal of Buddhist art as well as Jain art? And to what extent there been funding from the government or from private foundations in terms of also international collaboration?
Okay, before the next question, I'll just say I think we can take one more question. Those who are getting left out can please approach the speakers separately. Sorry about that.
No. Oh, yeah. So listen, I want to connect the first part to the second part. I have a set of questions, but I'm going to narrow it down. So, what we saw from the people who are doing the arts is a very powerful and moving way of thinking about the world as it exists and how you interpret it today, and connections that transcend the colonial experience. But Iftikhar, you just used the expression, and I wrote it down, violent reordering in the British Empire. So I want to ask, Gyan and Ranjana and all of you, there was a violent reordering, and in reconstituting history or constituting it, there was, I think the phrase is epistemic violence. It was a massive cultural, ethnic, intellectual violence that was visited upon the subcontinent. So how do you go about reconstituting a world after that and making sense of it? And in terms of connections and relevance to today, I'm just noticing two things. The correlation is not, of course, anything more than that necessarily, but one theme of the conference until now has been the pretty abysmal and perhaps pessimistic state of education in India. And I'm just also noticing that we are here dealing with reconstituting an intellectual and education tradition after epistemic violence.
Order of speakers. So, who wants to begin? Gyan or Ranjana, and then we can go.
Is it on? Yeah. Now, I want to take up the question of colonial violence. I mean, here I go back to Fanon. And Fanon, speaks about how colonialism was a fundamentally violent system. Now, he doesn't mean just physical violence, but the way in which the colonized were torn off from their society, their language, their culture, and so on. So the question then is, how does one reconstitute, right? And I think we have examples of the way in which people try to reconstitute. I mean, there are many examples, but I'll take the well-known example of Gandhi. The interesting thing that I often point out to my students in Hind Swaraj is that, Gandhi is often interpreted as a quintessential Indian and quintessential Hindu. But if you look at the appendix of Hind Swaraj, he has a list of authorities. Who are the list of authorities? Emerson, Tolstoy, Thoreau, and there are many other kind of Western writers, Henry Maine. And so the argument is that, it's not as if the violence leaves the colonized without any option, but you take the debris and reconstitute it in a different way. You reinterpret it, you reclaim it in a different way. I mean, look at Fanon. I mean, he writes in French. He talks about, writing in the language of the colonized, and yet he uses French in a way that can never be seen as, sort of a disciplinary French. Another example, Aimé Césaire, who uses surrealism and poetics in his language to transform the language into a kind of a very militantly anti-colonial text. So, the acceptance that there is this violence perpetrated by colonialism doesn't leave you helpless. In fact, it provides an opportunity and a site, and a kind of productive site, to take the shards of what remains and create something new.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I think I said all the speakers can have a chance, but I have been told that we must wrap up at 3 sharp because there's a panel scheduled exactly right now. And so with apologies, I hope these conversations can continue on the sidelines. Apologies. And thank you so much to all of our speakers, all of you for being here today. Thank you.